Little human boy paid a vampire king $10 to help him. What he asked left him shocked. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into our story. It all started in a small town, far from the glitz and glamour of the city. In the poorest part of town, a boy named Ethan lived with his grandmother. Ethan was only 8 years old, but life had already handed him challenges most adults would struggle to face. His parents were gone, and the little money they had was spent on rent and food, leaving him with very little for himself. He wasn't an ordinary boy. Ethan had dreams that seemed impossible for someone like him. He had heard whispers about the Vampire King, a powerful and ancient figure who ruled over a mysterious kingdom. The story said that he could grant wishes and solve problems that no one else could. But, of course, these were just stories. At least, that's what Ethan thought, until one cold night. He had nothing left but $10, the last of his savings. With no other choice, he decided to take a chance. He wrapped the $10 bill in a small cloth, clutching it in his hand as he set out towards the town's edge. The moon was full, casting a silvery glow on the narrow road. Ethan had heard that the Vampire King lived in a grand castle beyond the forest, a place so isolated it was only spoken of in rumors. But tonight, something inside him told him that he had to try. Ethan didn't know what he would ask for when he met the Vampire King. Maybe he would ask for a better life for his grandmother, or for a way to make sure they never went hungry again. The possibilities felt endless, but the $10 bill in his hand was a symbol of his hope, however small it seemed. As he walked deeper into the forest, the wind began to pick up, rustling the leaves in the trees like whispers. The air was heavy with tension, and Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he had to meet the Vampire King. He had no other choice. After what felt like hours of walking, Ethan finally saw it. The silhouette of a towering castle, its spires reaching high into the night sky. It was even more magnificent than the stories had described. His feet froze for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. This was real. The Vampire King's castle was real. Ethan stepped forward, his mind racing with questions. What if the Vampire King wasn't kind? What if he couldn't help? But then he thought about his grandmother, her tired eyes always full of worry, and the hunger that gnawed at his stomach every night. This was the only chance he had left. He walked through the castle's grand gates, a sense of awe mixed with fear settling in his chest. The walls were made of dark stone, and the air around him seemed to hum with power. Ethan didn't know what to expect, but he knew he had to keep moving forward. As he made his way deeper into the castle, he was greeted by silence, the kind of silence that only a place this old and powerful could carry. He reached the throne room, and there he saw him, the Vampire King. Sitting tall on a massive throne, his eyes glowed with a golden intensity. Ethan stepped forward, holding out the $10 bill in his trembling hands. The Vampire King's eyes shifted to the boy, a small smile curling at the corner of his lips. "What is it you seek, child?" he asked, his voice like the sound of thunder in the distance. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper as he said, "I need help. My grandmother. We don't have much, and I don't know what else to do." The Vampire King's gaze softened slightly, but he didn't speak for a moment. Ethan could feel his heart race in his chest, but he stood his ground. The Vampire King reached out and took the $10 bill from his hand, examining it closely. $10, he said slowly, almost as if the amount didn't matter. "And you want me to help you? What exactly do you want?" Ethan hesitated. His mind raced. He had no idea what to ask for. He looked up at the Vampire King, his voice shaking. "Please, help us not be hungry anymore." The Vampire King studied him, his golden eyes narrowing. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a laugh, deep and rich, echoed through the throne room. "Is that all?" the Vampire King asked. "That's all," Ethan whispered, his eyes not leaving the king's. The Vampire King leaned forward in his throne, his gaze fixed on Ethan. What happened next would change everything for the boy in ways he could never have imagined. As Ethan stood in front of the Vampire King, his heart pounded in his chest. He had asked for the one thing he thought could change everything: food for his grandmother. The Vampire King, silent for a moment, examined the $10 bill closely, as if trying to decide what to do with it. Ethan stood motionless, waiting for the king to speak, not knowing that this moment would alter the course of his life forever. The Vampire King's voice broke the silence, deep and commanding. "Is that truly all you seek, child?" he asked, his golden eyes studying Ethan intently. Ethan swallowed, feeling a chill creep up his spine. The king's power was palpable, almost suffocating. "Yes, that's all I need," Ethan replied, his voice barely a whisper. The Vampire King leaned forward slightly, his lips curling into a small, amused smile. "A mere $10 for such a request," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, without a word, the king stood and moved toward the window, the shadows of his long form stretching across the grand hall. Outside, the moon hung full in the sky, casting a pale light over the castle grounds. Ethan was in awe of the room: the dark stone walls, the towering shelves filled with ancient books, the heavy velvet curtains, and the flickering candelabras. It felt like stepping into another world entirely, a world of power and mystery. "What is your name, boy?" the Vampire King asked suddenly, turning to face Ethan. "Ethan," the boy answered, trying to steady his breath. "And your grandmother?" the king pressed, his gaze softening slightly. "Her name is Agnes. She raised me after my parents, after they died," Ethan said, his voice breaking at the mention of his parents. The Vampire King's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, and he walked back toward the throne. He sat down slowly, as though contemplating something deep. "You carry much pain for such a young one," he said, his voice almost gentle. "Tell me, Ethan, why did you think I could help you? A mere mortal, so small and insignificant, coming to me for help with $10. Ethan's heart sank. Was he making a mistake? Had he misjudged the power of the Vampire King? He had heard stories, yes, but now that he was standing here, face to face with such an ancient being, it seemed almost ridiculous. But then he thought of his grandmother, how she was always tired, always struggling. He couldn't give up now. I thought that maybe, since you have all this power, you could help us. I don't want to see her suffer anymore. I don't want her to die from hunger or cold," Ethan explained, his voice growing stronger with each word. The king studied him for a long moment, his piercing golden eyes not leaving Ethan's face. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he rose from his throne again and walked towards the boy. "You wish for food, Ethan? You think that is the answer to your problems?" he asked, his tone darkening slightly. Ethan nodded, feeling his throat tighten. "I don't know what else to do." The king was silent. Then he raised his hand, motioning for Ethan to follow him. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then walked behind the Vampire King as they moved down a long corridor. The cold stone floor beneath his feet echoed as they walked. At the end of the hall, they came to a large, ornate door. The king opened it with a wave of his hand, revealing a room full of strange objects. Books with strange symbols, artifacts that seemed to pulse with power, and shelves lined with jars containing mysterious substances. The king turned to face him. "Do you see all this, Ethan? Do you understand what it means?" Ethan nodded slowly. He had no idea what it all meant, but he could feel the power radiating from every corner of the room. "This is magic. This is what makes me who I am," the king said, his voice now filled with a quiet intensity. "And you, Ethan, are asking for something as simple as food. Do you understand how small your request is in comparison to the world I live in?" Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He had no idea what to say. All of this, the magic, the power, the king's vast knowledge, was overwhelming. But he had to try. "Please, help me," Ethan whispered, barely able to speak. The king regarded him for a moment, then walked to a large wooden desk, pulling out a piece of parchment and a quill. "I will help you, but not in the way you expect," the Vampire King said, his tone darkening once again. "You see, there are things in this world far more valuable than food, Ethan. And what I am about to offer you will change your life forever." Ethan's eyes widened in confusion. He had no idea what the king was talking about. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. The king looked at him with a strange, almost predatory gleam in his eyes. "I will give you something far more powerful than food," he said, his voice low and filled with a hint of danger. But in exchange, you will owe me a debt. A debt that will be paid in a way you cannot yet understand. Do you accept? Ethan was stunned. What kind of debt was the king talking about? But the thought of his grandmother, of her thin frame and sickly face, pushed him forward. He had no choice. Yes, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. I accept. The vampire king's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Then it is done, he said, sealing their pact with a small flick of his wrist. You will not go hungry again. But remember, Ethan, this debt is eternal. And one day, you will be called upon to repay it. I cannot believe this is happening, Ethan thought as he stood in the grand hall of the vampire king's castle. Just moments ago, he had made a pact that would change everything for him. The vampire king had promised him food, a solution to the hunger that had plagued his grandmother and him for as long as he could remember. But the words the king had spoken echoed in his mind. Asterisk, you will owe me a debt. A debt that will be paid in a way you cannot yet understand. Asterisk, Ethan's heart raced. He wasn't sure what he had just agreed to, but there was no turning back now. The king's words had an ominous weight to them, and though he couldn't comprehend what the debt would entail, he knew he had to keep moving forward. As he walked back through the dark corridors of the castle, his mind buzzed with questions. What kind of debt? What would the vampire king want from him in return for saving his grandmother from hunger? Ethan's thoughts were interrupted as he was led to a large dining hall. The room was lit by massive chandeliers, and the long table was piled high with food, more than Ethan had ever seen in his life. There were golden trays filled with roast meats, fresh vegetables, steaming bowls of soup, and freshly baked bread. For a moment, Ethan felt a sense of disbelief. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him of just how long it had been since he had last eaten. He had been so consumed with his grandmother's well-being that his own hunger had been pushed to the back of his mind. As he sat down at the table, the servants placed a plate before him. He looked at the food, unsure of how to proceed. This wasn't just a meal, it was a promise. And yet, despite the overwhelming sense of gratitude, there was something else, fear. Fear of the unknown. Ethan picked up his fork, hesitated for a moment, and then took a bite. The food was like nothing he had ever tasted. It was rich, flavorful, and comforting. His senses were overwhelmed with the taste, and he couldn't stop himself from devouring the meal in front of him. He had never known such satisfaction. The feeling of fullness and warmth spread through his body, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. As he finished eating, a servant approached him with a glass of dark red liquid. Ethan hesitated, not sure what it was, but the servant smiled and gently pressed the glass into his hand. It's a gift from the king, the servant said softly. He insists you drink it. Ethan, still unsure, took a sip. The liquid was smooth, with a rich, almost sweet taste, and it made him feel warm from the inside out. He couldn't help but drink more. Just as he finished, the doors to the hall opened, and the vampire king entered, his dark presence filling the room. His golden eyes met Ethan's, and for a brief moment, Ethan felt like the king was reading his very soul. You've eaten well, the king said, his voice smooth and commanding. But remember, you have made a choice, and that choice will come with consequences. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The weight of the king's words sank in. Consequences? He hadn't fully understood the ramifications of the pact, but now it was becoming clearer. He was no longer just a poor boy looking for help. He was part of something much larger, something he couldn't yet comprehend. Do you feel it, Ethan? The vampire king asked, his gaze piercing. Ethan was confused. Feel what? The king smiled, a wicked, knowing smile. The bond. The magic in the air, in the blood you just drank. You're bound to me now, whether you realize it or not. Your debt has already begun. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean? He asked, his voice trembling. The king moved closer, towering over him, his presence almost overwhelming. You came to me for help, and I gave it to you. But help, as you will soon learn, comes at a price. And you, Ethan, are now bound to my world. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He was trapped. The king wasn't just helping him. He was tying him to something darker, something far beyond the simple request for food. The king's golden eyes gleamed with something unsettling. You will understand in time. But for now, you may return to your grandmother, he said, his voice softening slightly. I will ensure that she is never hungry again. But remember, your debt will be called upon when I deem it necessary." Ethan stood, his mind reeling. He had come here with a simple wish, to end his grandmother's suffering, and now he was entangled in a web of magic and power that he didn't understand. The king's voice followed him as he turned to leave. "Do not forget, Ethan. There is no escaping the debt you owe me." Ethan nodded, though his heart was heavy. He had made a choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. As he left the grand hall and made his way back to his grandmother's cottage, the full weight of the Vampire King's words pressed on him. He had been given a gift, food, warmth, and comfort. But at what cost? And what would the king ask for when the time came? Ethan didn't know the answers, but he had a sinking feeling that the moment he feared had only just begun. "I can't believe this is happening," Ethan thought as he walked back through the dark corridors of the Vampire King's castle. The weight of what had just transpired was beginning to sink in. He had made a deal with the most powerful being he could ever imagine, an ancient, immortal vampire king. And now, he was bound to him, tied to a debt that he didn't fully understand. His grandmother, Agnes, would never go hungry again. That was a promise, but what would the price be when the time came for him to repay this debt? Ethan's thoughts were a whirlwind, each one more terrifying than the last. What would the king want from him? Would it be something he could live with? Or would it destroy everything he cared about? He had only asked for food, a simple request to keep his grandmother alive. But somehow, it had become so much more. When he arrived back at the small cottage, Agnes was waiting for him, her weary face lighting up when she saw him. She looked better than she had in days. "Ethan, you're back," she said, her voice filled with relief. "Did you find what we needed?" Ethan nodded, trying to smile, though his heart felt heavy. "Yes, Grandma. We won't go hungry anymore," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Agnes didn't question him. She was just grateful for the relief she could see in his eyes. They ate together that night, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt the warmth of a full stomach. But the feeling didn't last. After the meal, Ethan sat by the fire, his mind racing. What had he done? What had he gotten them into? He had hoped for a better life, for peace, but now it seemed like his wish had come with strings attached, strings that might just strangle him in the end. That night, as he lay in bed, sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see the king's golden eyes staring at him, burning with a cold, calculating intensity. And the words the king had spoken, asterisk, "You will owe me a debt that will be paid in a way you cannot yet understand," asterisk, echoed in his mind. What did that mean? What kind of debt was he talking about? Ethan wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. He had made a dangerous pact, and now he had to live with it. Days passed, and Ethan tried to go back to his normal life. He worked in the fields, helped his grandmother, and tried to forget the events of that night. But the king's words lingered like a dark shadow, always there in the back of his mind. Then, one evening, as Ethan was returning from the market, he felt it. The air seemed to thicken, like a storm was brewing, but there was no rain, no clouds in the sky. It was just an oppressive heaviness that made his heart race. And then he heard it, the sound of footsteps behind him. Ethan spun around, but no one was there. The streets were empty, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. He turned back, but when he did, he saw him. The Vampire King, standing in the shadows at the edge of the alley, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. How had the king found him? How had he gotten here so quickly? He opened his mouth to speak, but the king's voice stopped him. "Ethan," the king said softly, his voice like velvet. "It's time." Ethan's blood ran cold. Asterisk time? Time for what? Asterisk the king stepped closer, his movements graceful and predatory. "You made a deal," the king continued, his eyes narrowing. "And now the time has come for you to fulfill your end of the bargain." Ethan's mind went blank. He had barely been able to process everything that had happened, and now it seemed like the moment had arrived. I don't understand," Ethan stammered. "What do you want from me?" The king's smile was cold and knowing. "You'll find out soon enough. Come with me." Before Ethan could respond, the king reached out, and with a single touch, the world around him seemed to shift. The air became thick, and Ethan felt a sensation of weightlessness. In an instant, they were no longer on the quiet street, but in a vast, dark hall filled with ancient stone. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the only light came from the faint glow of the king's eyes. "Where are we?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. The king didn't answer right away. He only motioned for Ethan to follow him as he walked deeper into the hall. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the space, making Ethan feel small and insignificant. They arrived at a large, ornate door, and with a flick of the king's wrist, the door opened. Inside was a massive chamber, filled with strange symbols and artifacts that Ethan couldn't even begin to understand. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on the pedestal lay a strange, glowing object. "This is why you're here," the king said, his voice low and commanding. Ethan stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. What was this thing? What did it have to do with him? The king's eyes flashed, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's time for you to make your choice," he said. Ethan didn't know what to do. His mind was racing. Had he made a terrible mistake? And what choice was the king talking about? The king's gaze never left him, and in that moment, Ethan realized that his life and his grandmother's were in the hands of this immortal being. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. "I cannot believe this is happening," Ethan thought as he stood in the vast chamber, staring at the pedestal before him. The vampire king's words echoed in his mind. "It's time for you to make your choice." Ethan's heart raced as he slowly approached the glowing object. His thoughts were a whirlwind. This was not what he had imagined when he first set out to get food for his grandmother. He had been desperate, hoping for a simple solution to their hunger. But now, standing in this eerie room filled with symbols and strange artifacts, Ethan felt the weight of his choices. The king was watching him intently, his golden eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "What choice?" Ethan asked himself. "What could this possibly have to do with me?" The object on the pedestal seemed to pulse with energy, its glow soft but strong, like a heartbeat. Ethan hesitated, unsure of what to do. He could feel the pressure building in his chest, the anticipation of whatever the king had planned for him. He had already made a deal, but now it seemed that the real test was about to begin. The king finally spoke, his voice low and commanding. "You came to me with a simple request, Ethan. You wanted food. You wanted relief for your grandmother. But nothing is simple in my world." Ethan swallowed hard, the words feeling like a weight in his stomach. He had thought the king was offering a solution, a way out of their suffering. But it seemed that whatever was happening now was far from simple. "You asked for food," the king continued. "But I offer you something far more powerful. The object you see before you holds the key to your future." Ethan's gaze shifted back to the pedestal. The object was small, no bigger than the palm of his hand, but it radiated power. It looked like an orb, made of glass with swirling patterns inside it. It seemed alive, almost as if it were breathing. The king stepped closer, his presence commanding, filling the room with an energy Ethan could feel deep in his bones. "What is it?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. The king smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "This is a talisman, Ethan. It holds the power to change the very fabric of your life. But such power comes at a cost." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What kind of cost?" he asked, his voice shaking. The king's smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it. "You will have to give something in return. Something of great value." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. What could he possibly give up that was more important than his grandmother's well-being? He had already given up his sense of safety and comfort just by making the deal with the vampire king. But now it seemed like he would be asked to sacrifice something far more precious. "What do I need to give?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "Your soul," the king said simply. "A portion of your soul in exchange for the power to change your destiny." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "My soul?" he repeated, unable to believe what he was hearing. The king nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, a portion of it. Not all. You will still be yourself, but you will be bound to me forever. This is the price of power. Do you understand?" Ethan felt the weight of the decision hanging over him. He had already accepted a debt from the king, but this was different. This wasn't just asking for help, it was asking for his very essence. He thought of his grandmother, of the life they had shared, and of how much she needed him. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his humanity, his ability to be himself, even for her. Yet, at the same time, he knew that his life had already been irrevocably changed by this deal. He had stepped into the vampire king's world, and now there was no way out. What happens if I say no? Ethan asked quietly. The king's eyes gleamed, his expression unreadable. Then you return to your old life, Ethan. But the consequences will be dire. Your grandmother will not be the only one who suffers. And you will never have the chance to change anything again. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He wanted to protect his grandmother, but at what cost? I don't know if I can, he whispered, the words escaping him before he could stop them. The king regarded him for a moment, his golden eyes narrowing slightly. You will find a way. You will not be the first to make this choice, and you will not be the last. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing. The king was offering him power, a chance to change everything, but it came at the cost of his very soul. What kind of life would he have left if he accepted? What would he become? And if he refused, would his grandmother truly be safe, or would the king make good on his threats? Ethan didn't know the answer, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. His decision would shape the rest of his life, and his soul, forever. The king's gaze softened, just a little. It's your choice, Ethan. But remember, no matter what you choose, you will never walk away from this unchanged. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with anticipation. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind still racing, and then, finally, he made his decision. He stepped forward, towards the glowing object. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew he had to act. As his fingers brushed against the orb, the king's voice rang out behind him. Then you have made your choice. I can feel it, Ethan thought as the glowing orb pulsed beneath his fingers. The power was like nothing he had ever experienced, a surge of energy that filled him from head to toe. The moment his skin made contact with the object, he felt as though the very air around him shifted, vibrating with an ancient force. His heartbeat quickened, and for a brief moment, he thought he might lose himself in it. But then, as quickly as it came, the feeling subsided, leaving him standing in the same dimly lit chamber, the orb now warm and still in his hands. The vampire king's golden eyes locked onto him, studying him closely. You have made your choice, the king said, his voice low, almost approving. Now, you must face the consequences. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He felt something shift inside him, but he couldn't tell what it was. It was as if a piece of him had been altered, changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. He looked at the king, his mind racing. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The king smiled, but it wasn't the warm, reassuring smile Ethan had hoped for. It was cold, calculating. Now, Ethan, you begin your new life. The debt you owe me will be paid, and your world will be forever changed. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. What did that mean? He had thought that by making the deal, he was saving his grandmother, securing her future. But now, standing before the king, he wasn't so sure. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice shaking. The king's eyes gleamed with something darker, something far more dangerous. You will serve me, Ethan, in ways you cannot yet comprehend. Ethan's stomach turned. He had expected help, a way out of his troubles, not a life of servitude. Serve you? He repeated, trying to understand. In what way? The king stepped closer, his movements smooth and deliberate. You will help me maintain the balance between our worlds. You will work for me, and in return, I will ensure your grandmother's safety and prosperity. But you will never be free of me. Not truly. Ethan's mind raced. Work for him? He had no idea what that meant. He had never even considered the possibility that the king would want something like that. But there was no going back now. The king's power had already wrapped itself around him, like an unbreakable chain. And what if I refuse? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. The king's eyes flashed with a dangerous intensity. Refuse, and you will lose everything. Your grandmother, your life, everything you hold dear will be taken from you. You will never have the chance to change anything again. Ethan's heart sank. He was trapped, bound to a being far more powerful than he could ever imagine. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his chest. I don't know what to do, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The king regarded him with an almost pitying look. You have already made your choice, Ethan. There is no going back now. Ethan's breath hitched as he realized the truth. There was no escape from the king's world, no way to undo the pact he had made. His life would never be the same again. What do you want me to do first? Ethan asked, his voice shaking. The king smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "Follow me," he said, turning and walking toward the door at the far end of the chamber. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then followed, his feet heavy with the weight of his choice. They walked through the dark hallways of the castle, the air growing colder with every step. As they reached the outer courtyard, the king stopped and turned to face Ethan. "This is your first task," the king said. "You will help me find something. Something that is hidden, something that only someone like you can retrieve." Ethan frowned, confused. "What is it?" he asked. The king's smile grew wider, darker. "A key," he said. "A key to a door that has been sealed for centuries. It is hidden in a place that only you will be able to find. And when you do, you will unlock the path to a new world. But beware, Ethan. There are forces that do not want this key to be found. Forces that will stop at nothing to keep it hidden." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. A key? A door? He had no idea what the king was talking about, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had become far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. "And what happens when I find it?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The king's eyes gleamed. "You will open it, and everything you think you know will change." Ethan didn't know what to think. His world was already turning upside down, and now he was being sent on a mission that could change everything. The king had given him power, yes, but it came with a price. One that would take him deeper into the dark, into a world of magic and mystery that he had never imagined. "Go now," the king commanded, his voice low. "Find a key. And remember, Ethan, there is no turning back." "I can feel the weight of this mission," Ethan thought, as he ventured deeper into the forest. The Vampire King's command had been clear: find the key and unlock the path to a new world. But the forest before him felt more like a labyrinth than a place of discovery. Dark trees towered overhead, their branches tangled like twisted fingers reaching for the sky. The air was thick with fog, and every step seemed to echo back to him with a hollow emptiness. Ethan had no idea where to start. The king had given him no instructions on how to find the key, only the vague notion that he was the one destined to retrieve it. What did that even mean, he wondered. He wasn't anyone special, just a boy with nothing but $10 and a deal with a powerful, ancient being. The weight of the king's eyes haunted him as he walked. "You will never be free of me. Not truly," the king had said, and those words felt like chains around his heart. "What have I done?" he thought. Ethan pushed the thoughts aside as best he could. There was no going back now. He had to follow through. As he continued deeper into the forest, the silence was unsettling. No birds chirped, no leaves rustled. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He glanced around, trying to find any hint of the key or where it might be hidden, but the forest seemed endless. The path before him twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the unknown. His legs began to ache from walking, but he knew he couldn't stop. The king's voice echoed in his mind, urging him forward. "You will find the key." Ethan's pace quickened. He could feel the magic around him, the strange energy that seemed to hum in the air. Is this the key's power? He wondered. It felt almost alive, like it was waiting for him to make the right move. As he walked, he noticed something, a flicker of light through the trees. At first, it was small, like a firefly, but then it grew brighter, drawing him closer. Ethan stepped forward cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. The light wasn't natural. It seemed too sharp, too focused. It wasn't the warm glow of the sun, but something far more unnatural. When he reached the source, he found an ancient stone altar. The stone was covered in moss, and the air around it felt cold, as though the very place was trapped in time. The light was emanating from a small, intricately carved object resting on the altar. Ethan stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. It was a key, the key he had been searching for. But this key was unlike any he had ever seen. It glowed with an ethereal light, its surface covered in ancient symbols that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. Ethan reached out, his fingers trembling as he touched the key. The moment his skin made contact, a rush of energy surged through his body. It was like a jolt of electricity, shocking him to his core. He staggered back, his vision blurring for a moment, before steadying himself. The forest around him seemed to pulse with life, the trees shifting and the ground vibrating beneath his feet. Ethan looked down at the key in his hand. It felt heavier now, as though it was more than just a simple object. It felt like a part of him, something he could not leave behind. But there was a warning in the back of his mind. What will the king do when I return with it? The thought made him pause. The king had never said what would happen once the key was found. Would he be free of the deal he had made? Or was this just the beginning of something far worse? Ethan couldn't dwell on those questions now. The key was in his hand. He had to return. As he turned to leave, the air seemed to shift once again. A voice low and haunting reached his ears. It wasn't the king's voice, but something darker. Ethan froze. You shouldn't have come, the voice whispered. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned, but there was no one there. The forest remained still, silent. He shook his head, trying to clear the unsettling feeling that had crept over him. It's just the forest playing tricks on me, he thought. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The key, the power it held, it was attracting something. Something ancient, something powerful, that would stop at nothing to keep the key hidden. Ethan quickened his pace, feeling the weight of the key growing heavier in his hand. The forest felt alive now, watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. He had to get back to the castle, to the king, and deliver the key. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He had no choice but to see this through. As he made his way back through the forest, his thoughts raced. What will the king do with the key? He had already been bound to the vampire king, but would this key change everything? Or would it lead him deeper into the darkness? The questions kept swirling in his mind, but the answer seemed just out of reach. He had to find out. He had to know. And so, with the key clenched tightly in his hand, Ethan stepped forward, determined to face whatever awaited him. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. The moment he returned to the vampire king, his fate would be sealed forever. I can't stop thinking about it, Ethan thought as he walked swiftly back through the forest, the key still warm in his hand. The journey had been longer than he had expected, the shadows growing longer with every step. The forest felt even more oppressive now, the trees leaning in closer, as if watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves seemed louder, like the forest itself was whispering secrets. Ethan's heart raced with every step he took, a sense of dread creeping up his spine. The voice, the one that had whispered to him earlier, still echoed in his mind. You shouldn't have come. He shook his head, trying to push the unsettling thought aside. It's nothing. It's just my mind playing tricks on me, he told himself. But the weight of the key in his hand felt heavier with each passing moment. He had the key now. The vampire king's words were still fresh in his mind. Find the key, and unlock the path to a new world. Ethan wasn't sure what to expect when he returned with it, but deep down, he feared that it might be far worse than he could imagine. He had been bound to the vampire king in ways that were beyond his understanding, but this key, this object, was something different. It wasn't just another task. It felt like a turning point, the moment where everything would change. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that change. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly before him, but just as he thought he might be lost, he saw it, the towering silhouette of the castle rising through the trees, its high spires just visible above the canopy. Relief washed over him. He had made it. But even as he stepped closer, a part of him hesitated. What would happen when he handed the key to the king? What would the king do with it? The thought lingered in his mind, but he had no time to dwell on it. He had to go through with it. Ethan reached the gates of the castle, and they opened as if waiting for him. The castle was quiet, too quiet, and he felt the familiar tension in the air. The vampire king's presence was like a shadow, looming over everything. As he stepped inside, the coldness of the stone walls seemed to wrap around him, like the castle itself was alive, breathing, waiting. He walked through the long hallways, the flickering torches casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, amplifying the silence. Finally, he reached the throne room, the place where it had all begun. The vampire king was standing there, waiting for him, his golden eyes fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made his stomach turn. Ethan walked up to the throne, the key still clutched tightly in his hand. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The king didn't speak at first. He simply watched Ethan, as if waiting for him to make the next move. Ethan didn't know what to say. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable, until the king finally spoke, his voice low and commanding. "You have the key," the vampire king said, his gaze flickering to the object in Ethan's hand. "I trust you know what to do with it." Ethan swallowed hard, the key feeling heavier than ever. He had come all this way, but now that he was standing before the king, he wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever was coming next. I don't understand," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "What happens now? What do I do with it?" The king's smile was cold, almost cruel. "You will unlock the path," he said simply. "And when you do, you will see what lies beyond. But be warned, Ethan. What you find there will not be what you expect." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. What was the king talking about? The key had been in his hand for so long. But now, in the face of the king's cryptic words, it felt like it held a power he couldn't control. "And what happens after I unlock it?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The king's eyes gleamed, his smile widening. "That is the question, isn't it?" he said, his voice laced with an unsettling amusement. "What will happen when you unlock the path? Will you step through it? Or will you remain here, forever trapped in this world of shadows and deceit?" Ethan's heart raced. The king was right. This was the moment that would change everything. This was the moment where he would decide his fate, his future, and his very soul. He could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, but there was no turning back now. With trembling hands, he stepped forward and placed the key into the lock on the door that led deeper into the castle. There was a soft click, followed by a low, rumbling sound as the door slowly began to open. The air around him seemed to shift, the temperature dropping as if the very world was holding its breath. Beyond the door was a darkness so deep, so thick, that Ethan could barely see what lay ahead. But he could feel it, a pull, a tug, like a force drawing him forward. The king stepped behind him, his presence looming. "It is time, Ethan," the king said, his voice a whisper. In the heavy silence, "Step through and discover what lies beyond. But remember, there is no going back." Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: his life, his destiny, and his soul were no longer his own. With one final glance at the king, he stepped into the darkness, the door closing behind him with a soft, final thud. I stepped into the darkness, the door slamming shut behind me with a thunderous crash that echoed through the empty space. The air was thick and cold, pressing in on all sides, and I couldn't see a thing. The silence was so profound, so suffocating, that I could hear the beating of my own heart, frantic and loud against the stillness. My breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of what had just happened pressing on my chest. I had made the choice. I had stepped through the door. There was no turning back now. The Vampire King's warning rang in my ears. "What will you find when you unlock the path?" The question haunted me, but I had no time to ponder it further. The darkness felt alive, swirling around me as though it was waiting for me to make the next move. I reached out in front of me, but my hands brushed against nothing but air. I took another step, my feet uncertain, the ground beneath me feeling like it could give way at any moment. Just as I was about to speak, to call out, a faint light appeared in the distance, casting a soft, eerie glow that pierced the darkness. My pulse quickened, and I moved toward it, each step hesitant but determined. As I got closer, the light grew stronger, until it illuminated a large, open space. It was a chamber, ancient and vast, with towering stone columns that reached up into the shadows above. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the walls were lined with strange symbols, carved deep into the stone. This was no ordinary room. This was a place of power, a place untouched by time. I could feel it in my bones, the magic, the ancient energy that pulsed through the air. But something was wrong. The air itself seemed to be alive, crackling with tension. The light flickered, casting shadows that danced and twisted, making it difficult to know what was real and what was an illusion. My hand gripped the key tightly in my pocket, the cold metal comforting against my skin. I hadn't realized until now how much of a lifeline it had become to me, how much of my fate was tied to it. But now that I was here, in this ancient space, I wasn't sure what to do next. The king had said to unlock the path. But how? And what would happen if I did? As if answering my thoughts, a voice echoed through the room, smooth and deep, familiar yet strange. "You've arrived, Ethan. My blood ran cold as I turned toward the source of the voice. Standing at the far end of the chamber was the Vampire King, his golden eyes glowing with an eerie light. His presence filled the room, overpowering the very air. His expression was unreadable, but I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on me. "What is this place?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The king stepped forward, his movements graceful, almost predatory. "This, Ethan, is the heart of the power you sought, the place where the path you unlocked leads. It is where the veil between the worlds is thinnest, where the boundaries between the realms of light and shadow blur." I took a step back, fear creeping up my spine. "And what happens now?" The king's lips curled into a slight smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Now, Ethan, you must decide. You have the key, but do you have the strength to face what lies beyond?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What lies beyond? I thought. What had I just unlocked? Was I ready for this? The king's voice softened, but there was an edge of menace beneath his calm words. "The power you seek, the world you've stepped into, it's not just a gift. It's a test. And only those who are worthy can navigate its depths." "Worthy?" I asked, confusion lacing my voice. "What does that even mean?" The king's eyes glittered with something dangerous. "It means you will have to prove yourself. To prove that you are capable of holding the power that the key unlocks. Many have come before you, Ethan. Many have tried, and failed." A chill ran through me at the implication. The king wasn't offering me power freely. I was part of a trial, a game where the stakes were much higher than I could have ever imagined. "What kind of test?" I asked, my voice shaky. The king's smile widened. "You'll see soon enough." He gestured to the darkness ahead of us, where the path seemed to twist and wind beyond my sight. "The key has opened the way, but you must walk it. Alone. Alone." My voice cracked as I spoke. The thought of facing whatever lay ahead without the king's guidance terrified me. "I'm not prepared for this," I whispered. The king's expression softened, but only slightly. "You never will be. That is the nature of power. It is not something you can prepare for. It is something you must grow into. You must learn to control it, or it will control you." The words hit me like a flood. I had always thought of power as something that could be grasped, something that could be controlled. But now I understood the truth. The power I had unlocked was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And I was unprepared. I could feel the weight of the key in my pocket, its presence like a constant reminder of the bargain I had made. There was no going back. Whatever lay ahead, I had no choice but to face it. With a deep breath, I took my first step into the darkness, the path ahead of me uncertain, but the stakes clearer than ever. The Vampire King's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, you must prove yourself, or perish. Asterisk, I moved through the darkness, my footsteps barely making a sound on the cold, stone floor. The chamber around me was vast, stretching far beyond what my eyes could see, and the air was thick with an energy I could hardly comprehend. Each step I took seemed to echo back at me, amplifying the silence, heightening the weight of the moment. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the thrum of something ancient beneath the ground, as if the very castle itself was alive. I was in the depths now, deeper than I had ever imagined. The Vampire King's words were still ringing in my mind. Asterisk, you must prove yourself, Ethan, or perish. Asterisk, I wasn't sure what that meant, but the more I walked, the more I felt the intensity of the test ahead of me. I had been given the key, but the king had been right. Nothing had been as simple as I thought. It wasn't just about unlocking a door or finding some treasure. It was about me, about my very soul, and whether or not I could hold the power that the key had opened. I wasn't ready for this. I had no idea what I was stepping into. As I walked deeper into the chamber, the darkness began to shift. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I realized that the shadows themselves were moving, swirling like living creatures. A low growl filled the air, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to close in around me, and for a moment, I couldn't move. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A figure, tall and imposing, emerging from the darkness. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. Its body was a shifting mass of shadow, its eyes glowing a piercing red. The creature moved closer, and I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on me. My heart raced, and I instinctively reached for the key in my pocket, as if it could somehow protect me. But when my fingers brushed the cool metal, it didn't feel like a simple key anymore. It felt alive, pulsing with a strange, otherworldly power. "You must choose, Ethan," the creature growled, its voice like gravel. "You must choose to fight, or you must choose to die." I stared at the creature, my body trembling. What was happening? Why was this happening to me? I had come for a simple request, food for my grandmother. And now I was trapped in this nightmare, facing something far beyond my understanding. The creature took another step forward, and I could feel the air grow colder. "Your choice is simple," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "Face me, and you may survive. Turn and run, and you will perish like the others." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. My thoughts raced, but I couldn't seem to focus. How was I supposed to fight something like this? I wasn't a warrior. I was just a boy who had made a deal with a powerful, ancient being. The creature lunged at me, its claws outstretched, and I barely had time to react. I reached for the key in my pocket again, desperate for something to defend myself with. But the moment I touched it, a surge of energy shot through me, filling me with strength I had never known. The key's power flowed through me, and in that instant, I realized what I had to do. I raised my hand, and a wave of force shot out from the key, slamming into the creature and knocking it backward. The creature hissed, but instead of retreating, it came at me faster, more ferociously than before. It wasn't just physical strength that I had to fight. It was something far darker, far more sinister. The creature was trying to take control of me, to overwhelm my mind, to break me. But the key pulsed with energy, and with it, I fought back. I could feel the power inside me building, the power of the king's magic, the power of the pact I had made. I didn't have to be afraid anymore. I focused all my energy on the key, and with a single thought, I forced the creature back, the dark shadows retreating from the force of the magic. The creature screamed in fury, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. But it didn't vanish. Instead, it turned and ran back into the darkness, its growls fading into the distance. I stood there, breathless, my heart still racing. The room was silent once again, but the weight of what had just happened hung in the air. I had won this battle, but I knew it wasn't over. The creature was just one of many trials I would have to face. The path the king had set for me was far from simple, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. But I had no choice. I had made my deal, and now I had to see it through. I walked forward, the key still glowing in my hand, feeling its power as it surged through me. The deeper I went, the more I understood, the king had been right. This was a test of strength, will, and power. I didn't know what I would face next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. I walked deeper into the chamber, the weight of the key in my hand pressing down on me with every step. The air was thick with tension, and the walls seemed to close in around me as I moved further into the darkness. The creature I had faced earlier was just the beginning. I could feel it. The challenge ahead was far more than I had anticipated. The king had warned me, but now that I was here, I wasn't sure what I had gotten myself into. The power of the key surged through me, giving me a sense of strength and purpose, but it wasn't enough. I had to prove myself. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence, each one louder than the last. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt like I was walking into the heart of something ancient, something far beyond my understanding. The stone beneath my feet seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and the air around me felt charged with magic. I could sense it now, the energy that had been lying dormant, waiting for me to unlock it. The path ahead wasn't clear. There were no signs, no clues, just the oppressive weight of the darkness and the faint glow of the key in my hand. I pressed on, determined to see this through, to face whatever lay ahead. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the chamber, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I paused, my heart racing. The air shifted, and I could hear a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Ethan," I froze. The voice was low, echoing through the chamber, but it wasn't the king's voice. It was something darker. I spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing, just shadows and silence. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. The whisper came again, this time closer, as if it was right behind me. "You've come too far, Ethan. You're not ready." The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. It was like a distant memory, something I should have remembered but couldn't. I gripped the key tighter, trying to steady myself. The voice grew louder, more insistent. You should have stayed away, boy. This is not your world. You don't belong here. Panic began to rise within me. I had to focus. I had to keep moving forward. But the voice wouldn't stop. It was like it was inside my head, filling every thought with doubt. I tried to push it out, but it lingered, taunting me. You've made a mistake, Ethan, the voice hissed. You can't undo it. I shook my head, trying to block out the words. This is a test, I reminded myself. I can't let it get to me. But the voice kept whispering, each word sinking deeper into my mind. I couldn't run from it. I couldn't hide from it. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to calm my racing heart. The darkness around me seemed to press in, suffocating me with its weight. I had no choice but to move forward. There was no going back. I took a deep breath and pressed on, each step feeling heavier than the last. The chamber seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me, the walls narrowing with every step. I could feel the magic growing stronger, building, coiling around me. And then, ahead of me, I saw it, a figure standing in the shadows. At first, I couldn't make out who it was, but then the figure stepped into the light, and I froze. It was the king. His golden eyes glowed in the darkness, piercing through me as though he could see every thought in my mind. He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was cold, calculating. You've come far, Ethan, the king said, his voice like silk. But the real test is yet to come. I felt a chill run through me. What do you want from me? I demanded, my voice shaking. The king's smile widened, and he stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. I want you to prove that you're worthy of what you seek, he said, his voice low and dangerous. The power you've unlocked is not for the faint of heart. If you want to wield it, you must show that you can control it, that you can handle the weight of the responsibility it brings. What do I need to do? I asked, my voice trembling. The king stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. You must face your greatest fear, Ethan. Only then will you prove that you are worthy of the power you seek. My heart skipped a beat. My greatest fear. I didn't know what he meant. I had faced so much already. What else could possibly be more terrifying than what I had already gone through? But the king's gaze was unwavering, his expression filled with an unsettling certainty. You've already started down this path, he said softly. Now, you must finish it. The fear you face will shape you, just as the key has shaped you. You will have to decide who you are, what you are willing to sacrifice. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. This was it. This was the moment. The king wasn't just testing my strength or my power. He was testing my soul. What was I willing to give up to succeed? What would I do to protect my grandmother, to survive in this world that had been thrust upon me? There was no turning back. I had to face whatever came next, no matter how terrifying it might be. I took a step forward, my resolve hardening. I'm ready, I said, though my voice wavered. The king's smile grew wider, but this time, there was something more sinister in it. We shall see. With those words, the ground beneath me trembled, and the shadows in the chamber seemed to come alive, swirling around me like a storm. The final test had begun. I felt it. The air around me seemed to crackle with an energy that was both foreign and familiar. The king's words hung in the air, and I could feel the ground beneath me tremble, as if the very earth was responding to the challenge I had just accepted. The shadows surrounding me deepened, closing in, making the already dim chamber feel even darker. I had faced creatures, fought against doubt, and survived horrors beyond my understanding. But this was something different. This wasn't just about strength or power. This was about me, about who I was and what I was willing to sacrifice to survive. The king's presence loomed over me, but now, it wasn't just his physical form that filled the space. It was his power, his manipulation of the darkness, seeping into every corner of the chamber. The shadows twisted around me, forming shapes and figures that made my skin crawl. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, my breath shallow as I faced the growing terror. But I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. For my grandmother, for myself, I had to face this. This is the test, I reminded myself. The fear, the pressure, the darkness, this was part of it. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, trying to steady my breathing, and when I opened them again, I saw it. The shadows in front of me were no longer abstract shapes. They had become solid, real. Figures, dark and twisted, emerged from the depths of the room. They were monstrous in form, their bodies long and sinewy, with eyes that glowed with the same dark energy that had suffocated the space. My blood ran cold. These weren't mere illusions or tricks of the mind. They were real, and they were coming for me. The king's voice rang out, deep and calm as ever, but there was an undeniable darkness to it now. Face them, Ethan. You will not defeat them by running. You must confront your fear, or it will consume you. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to react. But then the first of the dark figures lunged forward, and instinct took over. I raised my hand, the key pulsing in my grip. The energy surged through me again, and I didn't hesitate this time. I focused all my thoughts on the power within me, the force of the key, and unleashed it. A blast of energy shot from my hand, colliding with the first shadow. It screeched, the sound like nails scraping across stone, before disintegrating into nothingness. I couldn't believe what I had just done. The key, the power within me, it had worked. But there was no time to celebrate. More shadows appeared, faster now, filling the room with their dark, suffocating presence. I couldn't stop, couldn't think too much. I had to keep moving. I raised my hand again, the key glowing bright in my palm, and with each pulse of energy, I took down another shadow. They fell with the same screeching noise, dissipating into the air like smoke. But with each one that fell, more emerged. The room seemed endless now, a swirling vortex of darkness and shadow, and I realized the truth. The king hadn't just sent me to fight physical enemies. These shadows were more than just creatures. They were manifestations of my fear, my doubt. The more I fought, the more I realized that this wasn't about defeating them. It was about understanding them, about confronting the darkness inside myself. I had been running from fear my entire life. From losing my parents, from the poverty I had lived in, from the deal I had made with the vampire king. Every time I felt cornered, I had tried to escape, to push the fear away, but now I saw the truth. The fear didn't go away. It only grew stronger the longer I ignored it. I stopped for a moment, breathing heavily, my mind racing. The shadows seemed to slow, as if waiting for me. This is it, I thought. This is my choice. The key pulsed again, and I stepped forward, my resolve solidifying. I was done running. I wasn't going to let the fear consume me. With a deep breath, I focused on the darkness in front of me and accepted it. I didn't need to defeat the shadows. I needed to embrace them. The moment I let go of my fear, something shifted. The shadows paused, their eyes no longer filled with malice, but with understanding. I reached out with my mind, touching the darkness. It didn't push me away. It didn't try to devour me. Instead, it began to change, to shift into something different, something less frightening. The figures that had once filled me with dread now stood before me, calm, still, no longer a threat. The room was still dark, but the oppressive weight had lifted. I had done it. I had faced my fear. The shadows, once my enemies, were now just part of the room. I turned to face the king, who had been watching from the shadows. His golden eyes gleamed with something. Approval, perhaps. You have done well, Ethan, he said, his voice low. You faced what others could not, and in doing so, you have taken the first step toward mastering the power you sought. I could feel the weight of the key in my hand, but now it felt different. Lighter, like I had unlocked something far more important than just the physical power it held. I had unlocked the ability to face myself, to confront my own darkness. And that, I realized, was the real key to everything. The king stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. But this is only the beginning, Ethan. There will be more tests, more trials. This world is vast, and your path is long. But you are not the same boy who first walked into this castle. I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in. This was just the start. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, I was ready. I stood there, the weight of the key still in my hand, as the room seemed to settle into an eerie stillness. The shadows that had once threatened to consume me were now nothing more than faint traces of the past, fading away into the air. I could feel the power surging through me, the energy of the key intertwining with my very being, like a bond that couldn't be broken. The vampire king's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, you faced the test, But this is just the beginning star. What did that really mean? What more could there be? I had overcome the darkness, proven myself worthy, but I had this sinking feeling that my journey was far from over. The king, who had been watching me silently, stepped forward, his golden eyes never leaving mine. "You've done well, Ethan," he said, his voice as cold and commanding as ever. "But your journey has just begun. The path you've chosen is not one that leads to an easy life. You've unlocked power, but with it comes a responsibility, a burden that will shape your future, for better or for worse." His words hit me like a wave crashing over me. I had thought that proving myself, facing my fears, would be the end of this dark journey. But now I understood. It was only the beginning. The key, the power, the pact I had made. It was all part of something bigger. And the weight of that something was just beginning to reveal itself. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What is this path you speak of? What more do you want from me?" The king's eyes glimmered with something. Was it amusement? Or was it a warning? "I don't want anything from you, Ethan," he said, his tone softer now, though still carrying the weight of his presence. "You have already given everything. The power you hold, the responsibility you now carry, it is yours to control. But understand this. There are others who would seek to take that power from you. There are forces at play that you cannot yet comprehend. And you must be prepared to face them." I could feel the gravity of his words settling in, heavy and suffocating. Forces? What forces? I had barely wrapped my mind around the magic, the shadows, and the fear I had already faced. And now, it seemed that this was just one chapter in a much darker story. "I will protect what's mine," I said, my voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling within me. The king nodded, as if he had been expecting this answer. "That is your choice, Ethan. But remember, protection requires sacrifice, and the road you walk will not be one of comfort or peace. You will have to fight for what you hold dear, and you may lose more than you think." I swallowed hard, his words settling into my chest like stones. There was so much more to this than I had realized. My thoughts flickered to my grandmother, to the life I had tried to protect. I had come here for her, for us. But the path I had chosen now felt like a never-ending maze. The king stepped back, his gaze piercing through me as if seeing something I couldn't. "The key has unlocked more than just power," he said. "It has opened a door that leads to a new world. A world that is both beautiful and dangerous. And you will be a part of it, whether you are ready or not." The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows stretching further, encroaching on the space between us. I didn't know what he meant by a new world. I didn't know if I could trust him, or if he was just leading me further into a trap. But I had already made my choice. There was no turning back. "Where do I go from here?" I asked, my voice hoarse with the weight of the decision that had already been made. "You go forward," the king said simply, his eyes never leaving mine. "You walk the path you have chosen, and you will either rise or fall." His words hung in the air, final and unyielding. The power of the key still pulsed in my hand, a constant reminder of the promise I had made. But with that promise came responsibility, a responsibility that would shape me, change me, in ways I couldn't even imagine. I stood there for a moment longer, the silence pressing down on me. The king didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me with those glowing eyes. "Remember, Ethan," he said softly, as if the words were meant for me alone. "You are not alone in this. There are others like you, others who have made similar choices, and they will be your allies, or your enemies. Be ready for whatever comes." With those final words, the king turned, his cloak billowing as he disappeared into the shadows of the chamber. I stood there for a moment, the weight of it all sinking in. The key, the king's words, my journey. It was all connected now, woven into something that was bigger than myself. I had made a choice, and now I had to live with it. But one thing was clear, this was only the beginning. The world was waiting for me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. But I had no choice. I had to face it, and I would. For my grandmother, for the future, for whatever came next.